Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Good day, everyone. Welcome back for another Shape the System episode. We're going to be talking about food today. We're going to be talking about magic, which I'm excited. We'll get to magic in a minute. But we're going to be talking to Paul Bevan. We're going to be talking to Paul all about the food industry, specifically meat industry. And so we'll get right into the problem space as we always do. But firstly, Paul, welcome to the show and tell us a bit about where you're coming from and also how you came to be working on this problem that we're going to uncover in a bit.
Thanks, Vincent. Good to chat to you today. That's it's going to be a really long answer to your first question. Yeah, so obviously, Paul Bevan, I'm the founder and CEO of Magic Valley. We're a cultivated meat company. I'm based in Melbourne, in Australia at the moment. And it's always funny talking about meat because I've actually been vegan for just over 10 years now. I was vegetarian for nearly 20 years before that. And now I'm running a meat company. So I guess the way we develop meat is the key differentiator, which, yeah, as you said, we can dig into a little bit later. But how I came to where I am. And I'm actually interested in your background as well, because I spent a number of years working for the banks. In credit analytics and then also in fraud analytics. And then after leaving the banks, I had a couple of other businesses, again, which is a really different tangent, a mixed martial arts gym, but also a finance brokerage as well. So obviously, a clear pathway to running a meat company. But
yeah, absolutely. All this is clearly connecting the dots looking forward or backwards.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? I guess where it all comes together, though, is probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, I got involved in quite a bit of vegan activism and animal rights activism. And so did a lot of, outreach, talking to people about the impacts of intensive animal agriculture, not just on animals, but obviously on the planet and their own health as well. Got involved with a political party, the Animal Justice Party, looking at law reform to, make a better world for animals and how we treat animals. And I found most of what I was doing to really be not a good use of my time and resources, because I wanted to have the biggest impact that I could for animals and how we treat animals. And a lot of that outreach that I did, talking to people about their diets, I very quickly realized people weren't interested in a slightly better veggie burger. They just wanted to keep eating meat, what you're familiar with. What most of us were brought up eating, food is a very, emotional choice. It's very culturally driven as well. And so having those conversations, I thought, yeah, look, this is just not going, where I want it to go. And then came across the technology to be able to develop what was known then as clean meat or lab-grown meat. We refer to it as cultivated meat now, but basically developing meat products within a lab setting without any animal slaughter involved. And so when I came across that technology, we can create the same meat products that people are familiar with, whether it's, lamb, chicken, pork, beef. It tastes exactly the same. It smells exactly the same. It's got the same mouthfeel to it. People are familiar with it. They don't have to change their behaviour, but we can do it in a way where there's no animal cruelty involved. It's a lot better for the environment. It's a lot more sustainable. It's obviously a lot more ethical. We can compete on price at scale. So why wouldn't people choose that option? So to me, I thought, yep, this is what I want to put all my time and energy and resources into, and basically went from there. So I know I've got a very varied background, but none of it's scientific. So I'm clearly not the scientist behind what we're doing. And then we basically, built out a team of scientific experts from there, and that's where it all started.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, that is a very unusual set of circumstances to arrive at it, but I guess at some point you kind of look at and have to balance between, like, what problem do I want to be solving and what set of skills do I have? And you said one of the things that came into this, you'd been in finance brokerage for a little while. Like, did any of the skills, just as a tangent, because that's kind of what I'm doing outside of doing a podcast.
Yes.
Any of that skill set flow into what you're having to work through now, at Magic Valley?
Look, it does. All of the businesses I've run previously have been an enormous help in terms of what we're doing, despite there looking like there being, no correlation between them. But obviously running a business is a massive learning experience, particularly coming from the corporate world. I left the corporate world and started running my gym and thought I knew everything. I thought I was smart. I've got a, fairly senior position in the corporate world, with the Big Four bank, and I can run a gym surely, but I had absolutely no idea about sales or marketing or
operations.
Exactly. Any of the things that you need to run a business. And so that was a really steep learning curve for me. But also, obviously, on the finance broking side, I think you learn a lot about partnerships, collaborations, working with other businesses, what's best for the customer, how can you improve your service offering, but also a lot of, I think, risk management as well. And obviously, a lot of that, personal interaction when you're dealing with clients, a lot of the relational relationship building skills. So yeah, I think, having any sort of business background, I think is helpful because it's just such a steep learning curve.
Yeah. I mean, look, I actually had a call earlier today with an inventor who's invented a really interesting air conditioning duct that basically reduces energy usage by about 25%. And the product sounds amazing. I haven't seen any technical spec, but if it does what he says it does, it should be in every house in Australia. But it's clear that his gap isn't a product problem. It's not an engineering problem, but actually a go-to-market challenge. It's how do you set up a business and scale it and attract capital or resources and partnerships, to your point. So it's interesting coming into this. You got to be careful. You got to fall in love with the problem, but I think you got to be careful not to be so in love with the problem that you ignore all the other things that have to happen to make your solution viable. So we'll get to solution in a second, but I do want to come back to kind of meat and the status of meat, because I think you kind of touched on it. And I was trying to find it just before the show, but there's this kind of arc of adoption where there's a bit of a hype cycle, and then there's this kind of trough of disillusionment type of thing that happens, and then you kind of claw out from here. And if I think about meat alternatives, and I would put cultivated meat kind of in that bucket, I feel like we might be in a period where we've come through a period where there's a lot of money thrown at this, there was a lot of hype, and there was a lot of stuff that came through, and even some of it had questionable health outcomes, and who knows what the environmental outcomes were. So maybe get us caught up, because I think if I asked this question 5 or 10 years ago, the answer would have been everyone's eating too much meat, we have to eat alternatives. Everyone's kind of bought that part of the argument. So where are we up to now with the status of meat and meat alternatives?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I feel like I've got a different viewpoint to this, or certainly a different lens on this, just because I've been vegan and vegetarian for so long and are very, very familiar with the products. So look, where we are today, and as you mentioned, when we're talking about intensive animal agriculture and, the system that we've had for, decades upon decades now, 80% of global deforestation occurs to clear space for agriculture, as it exists today. Roughly, 18% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are produced by animal agriculture, and around 77 to 80% of the world's farmland is used for intensive animal agriculture. So that system is simply unsustainable for where we're going in terms of population growth, urbanization, across multiple different countries, and so on and so forth. And so, as you mentioned, it's probably 5 or 6 years ago that we saw a real takeoff in the plant-based meat alternative sector. And I can certainly think back when I was transitioning to vegetarianism 25, 30 years ago. Your alternative then was to take the meat off the product, whatever the product was. There was an alternative. It was just, let's just remove these things. Here's your burger, but it's just some lettuce and tomato.
I've got to interject on this, because I actually drove from Sydney to Perth in a gold Charger, which is like an old vehicle, if you're not familiar with that is. I'm sure you know what it is, but other people might not be. And I was vegetarian for about 8 years myself, and I was trying to get a vegetarian burger at every roadhouse that I went to. And I would get laughed at, I would get, people throw stuff at me, but invariably I'd end up with a bit of potato that had been deep fried with a gross bit of tomato on it and some wet bit of limp bit of lettuce on it. And they're like, there you go, there's your veggie burger. So that all those memories just came flooding back with that comment. So thank you. But please continue.
Well, thank you for validating what I'm saying too, because people these days, particularly the younger generations, you say that and they sort of give you this weird look, what are you talking about? Because there's just so many more, vegetarian and vegan options available today. And so, so it's probably that few years ago where we did see a real boom in, plant-based alternatives. And a lot of that, from my perspective, is driven by, the marketing and the promise of those products, which primarily is better for the environment and more sustainable, more ethically produced. Yes, obviously, there's no animal slaughter involved. Health benefits potentially, obviously depends on the amount of processing. Price point has always been, difficult, but around or probably a little bit more expensive. But where it falls down, in my opinion, is that the taste of these products cannot compare to what people are looking for, because people are told, this mushroom teriyaki tastes like beef, or, this seitan tastes like beef, or this tofu tastes like chicken, or this pulled pork, this jackfruit tastes like pulled pork. Well, it just doesn't, because it's not. And so it never will be. And so what my perspective on it is that, people, consumers, they really want that product that is more sustainable, that is more ethically produced, that is healthier for them. Obviously they want to pay, price sensitivity is huge as well, but they still want it to taste like what they're familiar with eating. And a lot of that has resulted in a lot of first-time sales for plant-based products. And so there's this hype, there's all these new products on the market, people buy them, try them, they buy this plant-based chicken, doesn't taste like chicken, they put it back on the shelf, they never buy it again. And so I think that augurs really well for what we're doing, because we meet all those components with the cultivated meat product, but we also meet that expectation when it comes to taste. And so I think that's been the journey of the plant-based sector. That's borne out in the conversations that we have with the retailers as well when it comes to first-time sales. And that's certainly, my viewpoint, I guess, or insights into what's going on there.
It's interesting you say that. I was just, when you were talking about this idea that consumers are looking for better alternatives, it's a weird parallel, but I think it will make sense. It reminds me of when Napster came out. And people were like, my God, I can finally download music and get the music I want, and I can stream it. And it was completely legal. And Apple's thesis, which I think you can read if you in like the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs, basically says everyone was ready to be a legal consumer of streaming and downloading music. They didn't want to do it illegally. And Napster kind of validated the demand that there was a real intent to want this stuff. It's just that the delivery models or the economic models or the product itself were just not, weren't ready yet and weren't right. And once they were, the whole thing shifted. Do you think, kind of in terms of the industry generally, and we'll get to Magic Valley in a sec, but do you think the industry generally is kind of having its Napster moment where all the latent demand is there, and now it's whoever unlocks, or whichever group of companies unlock this inflection point around actual replacements to meet, not imitations, and the price point?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. The industry, if we talk about alternative proteins, which encompasses both plant-based and cellular agriculture as well, I think you're exactly right. The industry's gone through that early proof point of consumers want this. We need to do some tweaking to get it right, and I think that's coming certainly in the very near future. So I think it's a great comparison.
Oh, we can use that going forward. Hey, before one more question before we go on to some of the innovation specifically in Magic Valley. I am curious as well, and I'm not here to rain on anyone's parade or poo-poo anything, but as someone who doesn't eat a lot of meat and have been vegetarian for quite a period, and then a very minimal meat consumption now, and was vegan for a period as well, and tried a bunch of the plant-based alternatives, I got pretty deep on like what's in these things and how a lot of them are made. And I was like, this feels worse for me from a pure health perspective. Is there any, it's such a nascent industry, but is there any data or indication or research around these plant-based alternatives and how they might actually be less healthy for you than just eating meat or not abstaining altogether?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one, because with any new food product, you've got no long-term studies on those products themselves. So you can really only look at the ingredients within those products, and I guess how much sort of processing goes into that. I think it's probably generally accepted that highly processed foods, whatever they may be, are probably not as good for you. As something that's coming straight from the ground, something that's not in a packet, for example. But I think it would depend on product by product. A lot of people talk about, the additives and salt and sodium and, what else is added to those products, potentially not being, as healthy for you. But I think a lot of the ingredients in there are certainly beneficial and healthy. But I think it just depends on, the final product. How is it processed? How much processing do those ingredients go through? Are there any of those sort of nasties on the back of the label? If you're reading a whole lot of numbers and that sort of thing, I think that's when sort of people get wary.
I tap out at 4. As soon as there's more than 4 things, I'm like, all right, this is a problem.
Yeah, fair enough.
I don't know where anyone else's number is, but 4 is kind of my limit where I'm like, I'm just going to make my own veggie patty, forget buying one. Just so getting into kind of Magic Valley and how you're approaching this cultivated meat, I think before we talk about what you're doing and how you're doing it, it might just be useful to give a little bit of a primer on kind of the nature of cultivated meat, like how, in general terms, how this works, what the science looks like, and then we can segue into magic from there.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I guess when we're talking about cultivated meat, we're looking at a process of developing a real meat product within a controlled environment. So basically, broad brush of what the process is for developing cultivated meat, and there's many ways that you can do it. But broadly speaking, you're taking some cells from a living animal. So whether that's a cow or a sheep or a pig or whatever the case may be. You take some cells from that animal. That animal goes on and continue to live its normal, natural life. So there's no animal slaughter involved. You take those cells into the lab. You grow them up, primarily for food products where we're looking at muscle and fat. You're able to grow those cells in a container, let's call it, which we refer to as a bioreactor, which sounds like this really big, scary name that sounds very scientific and sci-fi, but it's really just container, typically glass at a smaller scale or stainless steel at larger scales, with an impeller in it that spins around like you would brew beer in, for example. So it's not as scary as it sounds. So the cells go into that container. You add some nutrients to those cells. They grow up. You harvest at the end of that cycle of growth, and you've got your muscle cells, your fat cells, etc. And depending on what your process is, you'll combine those together and create your real meat product. So you've got a real meat product that's come from the animal, yet there's no animal slaughter involved anywhere in the process. And ideally, obviously, what you're looking at is having that exact replica. And molecularly, it's identical, got the same nutrient properties in there. You've got the ability to tailor that nutritional profile because you're doing it in a controlled environment. It's obviously using a lot less land because you're not out in pastures. A lot less water, less energy when you're using renewable energy, obviously. And you are able to, as we've talked about a lot, tailor the nutritional profile, so the health profile, of that product by altering the components that you've got in it. It's in a safe, sterile, controlled environment, so much lower risk of pathogens, etc. As well. And at the end, companies are obviously working on different types of products. There's probably a structured product and an unstructured product. So when we talk about the structured products, we're talking about chops and steaks and fillets and those things. And then unstructured would be things like a mincemeat or a ground meat product. And there are companies worldwide working on all different species and product types.
Including mammoth, apparently.
Yeah, not sure. You're right. I'm not sure that was eaten or will ever be eaten, but interesting.
I got them on the map.
Yeah, interesting marketing tactic.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a thing as bad PR, apparently, unless you're manufacturing mammoth that now has been eaten for 10,000 years. Okay, cool. So in a nutshell, there's some form of cell culture, like you might have in a sourdough or something like that, just to relate it back to the existing food. And then there's a structure in which you can take that cell structure and that starter, if you like, and then feed it nutrients, put energy into the system, and then that culture just essentially grows and subdivides because it thinks it's a muscle that has to regenerate, or it thinks it's a living part of a larger organism. It doesn't know that it's part of a larger thing. If we translate that into how Magic Valley's approaching this, like let's get into brass tacks as much as you're comfortable around how you're thinking about it, and also where you're focused and why.
Sure. So, as I said, there are many ways you can do it. Obviously, I can speak in most detail around our process. So we take skin cells from living animals. What we've created so far is a lamb and a pork product. So obviously from a newborn lamb and from a piglet. We take
Lucy.
cells. Lucy, that's right. Yes, you've seen Lucy. Lucy provided our first set of cells, which really just came from a scraping from the ear. So it's really pain-free. We take those cells, as I said, into the lab, and we insert them, in the bioreactor. We're able to add nutrients to those cells. And as you mentioned, the cells basically will perform like they would inside the animal's body. And so we're adding things that they would normally get, glucose, amino acids, growth factors, etc., liquid, obviously, as well. And those cells then reprogrammed into what's called an induced pluripotent stem cell. Now, I know that's a whole lot of words that are very technical, but basically a pluripotent stem cell can become any cell or tissue type in the body. And so by directing those cells down particular pathways, we can create muscle, fat, bone, blood, connective tissue, organs, whatever you would normally, or any cell that would normally grow. So we are able to then, primarily for what we're doing, push those cells down the pathway for muscle and fat. And everything that we add to those cells is either plant-based or synthetically derived. So back in the day, and as typically is used in regenerative medicine, where this science comes from, this technology comes from, a lot of what would be added to the cells is what's called fetal bovine serum, which is basically the blood. This will get a bit gory, but the blood that's obtained from the fetuses of pregnant cows when they're slaughtered in the animal agriculture process. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. One of them is the ethical issue with that. However, there's other problems in terms of, from a commercial perspective, the cost of that, batch-to-batch variability, the potential for pathogens, the inability to scale that. But cells typically love growing in it because, it's blood. It provides all the nutrients that an animal would have floating around its body to enable it to grow. So we've had to basically replace that with, as I said, plant-based or synthetically derived components to help the cells to get the same, growth that they would from a traditional or biological perspective. So we do that. As I said, the cells then basically grow as aggregates or spheroids. So they basically attach to themselves inside the bioreactor. Bioreactor, as I said, has an impeller in it that spins around. It's got inputs and outputs. So we're adding in those nutrients as they grow, maintaining oxygen levels, pH levels, and those sorts of things. Those cells will grow over a number of days. At the end of that cycle, basically, those cells will continue to throughout that process, those cells will continue to proliferate and multiply. So they're getting larger and there's more of them. We then harvest those cells at the end of the process. So we're basically, scooping out the cells, which are muscle cells and fat cells primarily. We then combine them together and they will literally go through a mincer as you would mince meat today. So if you're at a butcher shop and you're seeing, the butcher putting meat through a grinder, that's exactly what we would do, same format. And then there's also the potential for hybrid products as well. So we've created some prototypes that we would call hybrid products that contain a plant-based component as well. And most of that's done just to keep costs down at the moment. And that's a regular process.
That's fascinating. I mean, I have questions. One of them, which is the most interesting part of this to me, is that getting of the animal cell to be able to have the starter to be able to do this, it feels like actually the easier part of the equation. The harder part of the equation is finding a way to nourish that starter into a cell structure itself, and then secondly doing that without just going to sources of animals, which kind of defeats the purpose. Is that from Magic Valley's perspective, you guys have been at this for a few years, is that where so much of the focus in the R&D has been in regards to how do you do this with non-plant-based? And in some respects, without giving it all up, where are these feedstocks coming from? How do you synthesize them in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And as part of the commercial aspect, what we add to the cells is just referred to as media. So, not media as in TV and newspaper, but cell culture media, which basically just refers to, the liquid and the ingredients that we add to the cells. It's typically the most expensive part of the process as well. So we've put a lot of work into refining our media recipe, for want of a better term, term, to find alternatives to use that are, plant-based or synthetically derived, and that can be produced cheaply. So, doing protein expression and that sort of thing. So a lot of the R&D has gone into that in terms of bringing that cost down, and that's industry-wide, I guess, as well. And a lot of companies, obviously, as I mentioned, started out using animal products or FBS, and they're looking to move away from that now. We've never used it, so we've started. We've been working, as you said, on this for a number of years, particularly on the media development, and it's also different media is required across different species as well. So it's quite an intricate and involved process, and a lot of R&D has gone into that so far.
Yeah, and in some respects, if I think about the manufacture of, say, a solar panel, right? It's an industry where it's not like company X says, hey, we want to manufacture solar panels and we're just going to, all the pieces are here and our job is to assemble them. There's so much interconnectedness between, the people who produce the cells and the people who produce the technology and the inverters and the hardware. You talked right up front about the importance of partnerships in all this. In terms of Magic Valley, how much of this has to be done in-house, and do you have to develop these technologies, and how much of it is you saying best in class is this part for this particular part of the equation, and we partner to bring that thing in, and our job is to bring this stuff together? How does that interplay work out?
Yeah, it's a really great point, because there is so many different skill sets and technologies required, from taking a sample of cells to producing an end product, because we go through the cell biology part, tissue engineering, then we've got chemical engineering when it comes to media development, then we've got actual engineering when it comes to the bioreactors and the manufacturing, then we get to, that's before we even get to food science and nutrition. Sure. and production,
taste and marketing and all the other things that have to happen.
Exactly. So it's a really extensive process. We've done a lot of that in-house ourselves, particularly when it comes to the cell biology aspects and the media development. But other components, like infrastructure, so the bioreactors, there are other companies set up to do that. There are companies that provide particular components, I guess, for the media, as we were discussing, whether it's a growth factor or basal media and that sort of thing. You've got big pharma companies that have been doing it for therapeutics for a long time, but then you've got startups now as well within the cellular agriculture industry, coming in to provide cheaper and different solutions than has historically been available. We've done quite a lot of work in terms of I guess the food side with existing food companies as well, when it comes to taste testing and that sort of thing. But I guess when it comes to the actual cell biology, the cell lines that we've created, those induced pluripotent stem cell lines, when we developed the lamb's cell line, which is the ovine species, we did that without using any animal components. That's the first time that's ever been done in the world. So a lot of the things we're doing are world first things as well in terms of technology breakthroughs. And so there's definitely no existing playbook for how to do this, where so many first time things. But then you're working with other companies that are, or other startups particularly, that are trying to do the same thing, whether it's with their bioreactor or with their media development or whatever. And I guess there's been quite a good community built within the industry. We're all working towards a similar end goal, which has been one of the really, I think, key benefits of such a nascent industry. It's very new, it's very difficult, it's very challenging, but you have got other people that are going through the same thing as you.
Yeah, I mean, my first question was that specifically within kind of the local geographic market in Australia, or even more broadly, there's collaboration and kind of discussion?
Globally, yeah. Most of our partners or collaborations have been international. Which has been really great. It does present some challenges when you're trying to move things around across borders, but it's absolutely a worldwide industry and goodwill worldwide for the industry.
Look, I mean, the way I see cultivated meat is that it's kind of, not in the same ballpark as fusion energy, which is, the ongoing joke of how far away is fusion energy. It's always like 10 years away. Cultivated meat feels close, and it feels close because the inputs are becoming more available. One of the inputs being energy, and you talk right up front about renewable energy, just becoming more and more available, meaning that at some point there's an inflection where it becomes, even without baking in the externalities of putting a cow on a piece of land, it's still becoming cheaper for the inputs to go into cultivated meat, and the only gap is scale, right? And so if you look at the people who are on your side of the fence who are saying, hey, we're like 0.00001% of the industry. If we were 1% of the industry, we would have the scale to outcompete traditional meat from a pure cost perspective. Then all that's left is distribution. It feels like that's kind of where cultivated meat's at. Am I right in my assessment of that, or is there anything else that I'm missing in that?
No, I think you're right, and I think that's a realistic view. It's interesting that you mentioned like costs coming down because 4, 5, 6 years ago, a bioreactor that would cost you $2 million plus to buy off the shelf, you can purchase that now for about $300,000 or $400,000. And so even just infrastructure costs, just because of competitiveness, competition within the industry, you don't have to buy this product that was developed for the pharmaceutical industry and pay exorbitant retail prices.
Pharmaceutical prices.
Now there's startups or other companies that have entered the industry and, they're able to do it much more cheaply and much more reasonably priced. And it's, but it's basically the identical product. So,
yeah.
So that is definitely right. And things have changed a lot over the past, 4 or 5 years. As I mentioned, media, that you would typically, buy off the shelf, again, costs, hundreds and hundreds of dollars per litre, can now be produced in the, single digits. And so, when we're looking at scale, I guess there is a bit of a comparison because there was a lot of hype, around cultivated meat as well, probably 3 or 4 years ago now in terms of, it's here, we're ready, but we've still got to go through a regulatory approval process as well. And obviously with anything new, the laws and regulations take a little while to catch up to the advancements with technology. And so the regulatory approval process is taking a bit longer than was expected, not just in Australia, I'm talking globally. So that is, I guess, delayed things a little bit, as well as the scaling up component as well, because there is still some work to be done there in terms of producing at scale and in large enough bioreactors and in producing enough mass, I guess, end product. But there is, what's needed there is, additional capital injection and a little bit of time. But, the technology's there, it's ready, it's ready to go and to be taken to market.
Yeah, and probably the other part of this, which I think I know the answer to, but I kind of want to hear it explicitly or be told it's wrong. Yeah, like from the perspective of just pure consumer or customer acceptance and adoption, if you put a cultivated meat product in front of a customer at a price point that was consistent with traditional meat or whatever the right word is you use for that, is there anything that the customers have any kind of concern about, or it's a non-event for a big enough portion of the market that it doesn't matter?
Yeah, it's. I would like to say that there's no pushback, but there is a little bit still. But I think you raise a really good point because we've seen that change over the past 4 or 5 years in terms of consumer acceptance. I would talk to people about what I was doing 5 years ago, and they had no idea what I was talking about. 1 in 100 people would know, what lab-grown meat or clean meat or cultivated meat was. Now I talk to people about it, or even in the research that that we've done with the market research, it's well over 50% of people know would know what you're talking about. And the pushback typically comes from people who don't know what it is. So if someone hasn't heard about it, something new, that sounds a bit weird. No, I'm not interested. Is there immediate response? What we've found, though, is once we describe to people the process and explain what it actually is, then they want to try it. And so I think it's more of an awareness issue at the moment than it is...
Or an educational issue.
Yeah, an educational issue, absolutely. And so the other thing we've found, though, as well, we know there's a portion of the... proportion of the population that is never going to want to eat cultivated meat just because I've always eaten my meat this way and this is how I'm going to do it. And you're never going to convince those people. But typically when it comes to, and you've probably seen this as well, when it comes to just technology in general, younger demographics are much more open to, change, adopting new technologies. And that certainly applies to food products as well. And so it definitely consumer acceptance skews towards the younger demographics. But as I said, once we explain to people, particularly in the older demographics, how it's produced, what we're doing, the benefits of it, environmental environmental, sustainable, ethical, even, the health profile of the product, less risk of, pathogens, which is really big since, COVID, obviously. People are much more likely to want to try it. But interestingly, what has become really important in recent times when we're talking about food choices is the cost, as you mentioned. So, cost of living is up right across the world, particularly in Australia. And price point is a real key component when people are making purchasing decisions for their food.
Yeah. And I guess my rounding question around that was if in general, anyone who's got an awareness and some education of the product is unless they're in that category of I'm never doing this ever, okay, great, park them. But in the I'm open-minded, is how much of this now from where you stand, both as an industry but also specifically as Magic Valley, is kind of a technical challenge in terms of how do we scale this thing up versus a brand challenge of how do we get people to choose this as opposed to the thing they've got, or kind of a larger economic challenge, how do we get this thing to a price point? Which of those things is the kind of big lever, or the ones where you've these two we'll get in the end, but this is the one that's kind of where all of our energy is? And kind of from the Magic Valley perspective, where are you focused and how are you approaching on each of these?
Yeah, no, great questions. I think that it's twofold, and I think it will change over time. So at the moment, it's really scale for us at this point. Scaling up, being able to produce large enough quantities to be able to make an impact or make it accessible to the mainstream population. So I think that's the first challenge, and that's what we're focused on at the moment. Once we have regulatory approval for our products and we can get them into market, or as we get closer to that, then I think it will shift towards the consumer education piece, building trust with the consumer, doing the education, making sure that people are educated around their food choices, which I think traditionally people you can watch a million videos on YouTube and understand where your food comes from, but I think people are still very ignorant to that. I think there's a willful ignorance. They don't want to know, they don't want to see that.
Well, no one wants to kill the chicken themselves. I think that's the easiest way to explain it.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. And so, I think there'll be still quite a large piece to do there with the consumer. But we would hope, by that point in time that, what we're really looking to do at Magic Valley is to, partner with, established, food companies, trusted brands, trusted brand names, people that, work in the industry, chefs, et cetera, and work with them, educate them, and then hopefully, we can work together to, educate the end consumer.
Got it. And so if I kind of put those things in a linear flow, you're at a point now with Magic Valley where you're we know the technology works. Right? There isn't a question of whether we can take these inputs and this energy and produce this output. And from the field trials that we've run and the cool videos that are online, and if you're listening to this, I suggest go and watch them. And I want to try the product at some point too, by the way. I don't know how, do I have to come to Melbourne? Is that how I have to get that to happen?
At the moment, yes.
Okay, that's fine. I'll come to Melbourne. I love getting on planes for no reason or for good reasons. So the technical solution, the thing, we know this stuff works. Magic Valley's it isn't a question of whether the tech works. The chasm now to get through is less of a technology one and more of an economic / how do you scale this thing one, which feels like a far more accessible problem. It's a different challenge because now you have to convince people who aren't in the thick of it and don't understand what media and protoplasm, whatever it was, whatever those other 5 or 6 terms you just threw at me, which all need better names, by the way, I think, or consumer-friendly names, as opposed to industry names. But you've got to convince a group of people that, hey, this thing is at an inflection point, and today it costs us, $60 per kilo to make this stuff, and at the point where it can be $10 a kilo, it isn't a factor of the technology has to get better. It's just the factor of the production means need to change so that we can achieve the scale to be able to do this. And that feels like an amazing inflection point. If your capital saying, we want this thing to happen, we believe someone's going to work it out, all the signs are there that this problem's not going away, the opportunity, if you want to think about it in those terms, isn't going away. So is that kind of where Magic Valley's at now? It's just we need to just bring the capital in to be able to take that leap?
Yeah, you're spot on. You're spot on with your assessment there. That's exactly where it's at. We know the technology works. We've produced multiple prototypes, and we're really just looking to scale at this point in time. The costs will come down, as we scale up, and a lot of that just comes from economies of scale. It's literally bulk purchasing those inputs and those sorts of things. So there is a little bit of adjustment to the process, obviously, as you scale up, some refinement. But yes, literally, it's a matter of capital, some infrastructure, and then being able to start producing at scale.
And then obviously in parallel get through the process of letting people put it on shelves.
Correct. The regulatory approval process, spot on, 100%.
Always the thing. I mean, I love making parallels, but this just reminds me so much of Geordie and Julia Kay, who came in from Great Wrap, and they hadn't quite raised capital to open their first factory. They'd kind of been making biodegradable, compostable wrap in their kitchen, I think, at home. But they proved the science worked, right? And similar to you, actually, they'd gone out as people who didn't really understand the science completely and had found people who had a really good understanding and kind of leveled up super quickly. But the challenges that they were facing at that point were exactly, this isn't a question of whether the technology works now. It's the financial impetus to go to a scale where this is a competitive product in a marketplace where the economics is still such a critical part of the decision. No one's going to pay over the odds to buy this stuff in any degree that will have the impact that we're all looking for.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to that because that's exactly the same position that we're in at the moment. It's, yes, convincing people of what the future looks like and getting down to work.
Wonderful. Well, look, I wouldn't normally do this because I kind of, as I said right up front, like I started this show to focus on the problem and the solution and the innovation. But I am curious, like economically, like what is it? How are you trying to raise how much to be able to take this leap? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We're looking at a $3 million raise at the moment to enable us to get through that regulatory approval process, scale up, and start bringing products to market. It's not a lot of money. I mean, it is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in terms of what we're trying to do and trying to achieve.
That's an amazing outcome.
And we've been pretty capital efficient to this point, which has been part by necessity, but also partly driven by, I guess, as we spoke about earlier on, my experience in business and risk management and, wanting to keep, those costs tight as well.
Yeah, look, it's funny, like over the last 4 or 5 years in a business that I'm involved in, we virtually didn't do any technology, just focused on operations and just said, if we get really good at managing the process and managing the money, it actually will buy the space to take the time to get through the product development and understanding the customer proposition. So, I mean, that set of skills is amazing, as we said right up front. Well, look, I mean, as I've said on previous shows, I don't know how it keeps happening, but we seem to find companies just as at their inflection point. And Great Wrap's a good example of that. Amber was a great example of that. Even the guys over at Critical, Rui Peng, great example of that. So I'm hoping that we're an inflection point for you when this comes out. And we have a good chat about this in a year or so when I come down and have a lamb meatball thing. I think I was trying to remember what the video was. Any closing thoughts for anyone who's listening today on the show?
Yeah, look, I guess for anyone that's listening, we did dig into the process in quite a bit of detail and, those technical terms. But I guess really, as we also touched on, I would really just encourage anyone, who's curious about it, who this discussion has piqued their interest, feel free to reach out. As you said, we've got a lot of information, on the website, around the process, around what we're doing. You can sign up to join the wait list to come and try the products as well. So if anyone wants to do that, yes, Vincent, I know you're on there. Anyone that wants to do that, we just encourage you to do it, and if you've heard, things about, lab-grown meat or cultivated meat, as we refer to it today, and you've got questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We try and get back to everyone who has questions around, what we're doing. And I'd really just encourage, everyone to be open-minded to it, to give it a go, and see what you think.
Love it. Awesome, Paul. Well, thank you again for coming on the show. I hope we regroup in a year and hear about all the progress that you've made, and all the best.
Thanks so much, Vincent. I appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.